Chicago. So, Kyle Davidson was named the new GM of the Blackhawks earlier this week, and when it comes to the new direction of where this team is going to go down, Davidson has made it very clear where exactly he intends to take this team into the long-term future, and it's not really surprising to anybody who takes a look at the NHL standings. Right now, Chicago, if you look at the Western Conference, they are second last in the Central with 48 points in 55 games played, a minus 50 goal differential, and they're the third worst team in the entire Western Conference. Only Seattle and Arizona are worse. Despite that fact, though, I wanted to give some props to the Blackhawks because yesterday they did actually go out there and defeat the Oilers, and this was a pretty big win for anybody who's in my town, Vancouver over here, checking out the NHL standings and seeing where the playoff race is heading, because the Pacific is probably the most, difficult to predict race out of all the divisional races for the playoffs this season, so if you're a Canucks fan in your team playoffs, any piece of help works, and Chicago went out there and solidified things in overtime because of a very nice passing play between DeBrincat and Kane. Now, on the subject of that Patrick Kane, I wanted to talk about what exactly the updates are when it comes to Kyle Davidson and the rebuild, because he did say it's going to be a rebuild. He wants to use that word and not the word retool. He also talked about, the time span, 5 years, I think it was, 3 to 5 years, something like that. And so now what Chicago Blackhawks fans are getting is very clear, very direct notice as to what their team is going to do. There's no more ambiguity. There's no more, okay, we have Seth Jones, we have Kane, we have Toews, we have Keith, we have Seabrook. We're going to try to make the playoffs again. We're going to try to retool on the fly. None of that. This is a rebuild. They're going forward with it, and Davidson is going to be the guy at the helm to make things happen. Now, even though you have yourselves a rebuild, you still have Toews and Kane, which are two very important NHL stars, two top 100 players of all time, according to the National Hockey League, and these guys are definitely not long-term options for the Hawks. If you want to go out there and say, okay, 3 to 5 years is our timeline right here, well, guess what? Patrick Kane is 33 years old, so he's certainly not going to be a 5-year option if you realistically want to go out there and see who is going to be on the Blackhawks by the time they're competitive again in 5 years. Kane is going to be 38, and Toews is also going to be pretty old too, so there isn't really a projectability there. Still though, Kane at 33 years old is a very effective player, 55 points in 51 games played, playing on one of the worst teams in the entire NHL. He's on pace for 84 points this season, and he's got himself a contract that expires next year, making $10.5 million a season. He's got a no-move clause, and he talked about how he actually does want to stick around in Chicago and that he would want to stay. Yeah, I think so. The question was whether or not he wants to finish his career with the Blackhawks. There's probably a lot of time to determine what's going to happen in that regard, but I mean, let's be honest. I love Chicago, I love the city, I love the fans. The organization has been amazing to me and my family, so there's not much to not like here. But I think there's always business decisions. I know in the game of hockey, there's not many guys that have played their whole career with one team, so it would be a privilege and an honor to do that, but I guess we'll see how it all plays out. That quote was from Wednesday. We also had ourselves 32 Thoughts, Elliot Friedman, on the Sportsnet article from Wednesday as well. As sports world restricts Russia, there is a fallout in hockey still unfolding. Obviously, you can kind of guess what he talks about at the beginning parts of this entire article. Belarus, Russia, the hockey tournaments, etc. You can go ahead and read that. The link will be in the description below. But I also wanted to talk about the first actual thought he has here in this 32 Thoughts article, highlighting Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. Newly hired Chicago GM Kyle Davidson made it clear the Blackhawks are in a full rebuild. There are some things we need to fix that are going to take time, he said, while being introduced on Tuesday. But he did offer up one key hint. Kane and Toews are extremely important pieces to the organizations. They're definitely going to be brought into the loop. There won't be any surprises on their end on what we plan on doing with the organization. Now, before we expand onto what else Friedman says and what else the quotes read over here, that to me is a really big deal, the fact that Kane and Toews are going to be brought in on these discussions and actually told what's happening. Why is that a big deal? Well, because a year and a half ago, something like that, we had ourselves a video that we made talking about how Kane and Toews are pissed off with the team, and the reason we made that video was pretty much the opposite as to what Davidson was saying in this quote. Rumor had it back then that Toews and Kane were not really consulted on what the Blackhawks were planning to do, and when they traded away some important players for some younger guys, it was a decision that had a pretty big riff in the locker room and had a lot of the older players, like Kane and Toews and Keith and all that, saying, okay, what the hell, like, what are we doing here? And so, for Davidson to go out there and change that narrative and be like, yeah, we're going to start talking to these guys. Whenever we make a trade, we're going to have their input and we're going to have their guidance as to what they feel is proper in this situation. All of a sudden, it becomes a lot more transparent, which is a good thing. And what this also does is it gives Kane and Toews the out. It allows them to say, okay, Kyle, you're going out there, you're trading for this prospect, you're trading for these picks, you're trading away this roster player. I think maybe it's time for me to start thinking about where I'm going to head off to, because if you're going to make this trade, all of a sudden we're going to be even worse, and if we become even worse and there's a team that's willing to trade for me and yada yada yada, maybe we could go out there and actually get that done. I mean, Kane even acknowledged it in his quote, saying that he's aware that it's difficult for NHL players to play their full careers with one team. Going back over onto the Sportsnet article, though, before Davidson's official hire, the word out of Chicago was that the only way Toews or Kane would be traded was if they wanted to go, since they're both 1 year away from UFA status. Both will be given a picture of what Davidson is thinking, and we will see how they feel. The Blackhawks have indeed been asked about Kane, but I can't imagine anything happening before the summer, assuming anything happens at all. And so there you go. Patrick Kane has indeed been called about, and you know, for anybody who's watching this video, it's easy to go out there and say, I mean, duh, of course, it's Patrick Kane. Why would you not ask about this guy? Why would you not call up the brand new GM for a team that's one of the worst in the NHL, who have one of the best American players to ever play the game, who's still over a point per game now, and not call about this guy? Why would you go out there and, like, hold yourself back from having that conversation? It's just, in writing, hearing it out from Friedman, it does kind of solidify things in my mind that, okay, there are already preliminary talks going on with Kane, and so if one of these guys, Toews or Kane, decided one day, okay, I'm sorry, Kyle, but we're just not that good. I want to go out there and win another Stanley Cup on my last year of the contract or whatever, there probably would be a deal or two that's already in place that Kyle Davidson could have just kept on the back burner, saying, okay, just in case Patrick Kane asks for a trade, there is X team willing to pay Y, Z, and Alpha for this player. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, right? Like, having a few options out there, it would make sense to me if he would have something like that in the back burner. And just imagine if Kane goes to somewhere crazy, like, I don't know, he gets 50% salary retained by Detroit and then gets sent over to another team, like Colorado or something, just to pull a team out of thin air. Like, you could really go out there and give yourself a run with Patrick Kane as one of the top guys on your team. This is kind of the same philosophy that we had with the, oh man, who was it? We talked about this like a few days ago. Oh boy, I'm really drawing a blank over here. But if you're going to trade for Patrick Kane, you're probably a team that's already good enough to be considered a playoff stud already. Like, a trade for Patrick Kane would cost you so much that it would be the ultimate, okay, we're going for it, we're all in kind of move. Like, you're not going to see some tweener team, a wildcard team, go out there and make a trade for Kane. You're going to see one of the top teams in these divisions over here. And so, right away, you could automatically assume that any team that Kane is going to is, like, guaranteed for the second round, are they not? Maybe even the third round, because any team that would be that good already, adding on a Kane, makes things a lot more predictable now, doesn't it? So it would be really interesting to see if any of the teams at the top of their divisions would go for a Patrick Kane, because those are probably the only teams that I feel it would be appropriate to even have those conversations in the first place. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, you know, a cycle that kind of validates itself either way. So if you're a fan of any of the top teams, not going to name any names specifically, but you know who you are, would you feel comfortable going out there and making a trade for Patrick Kane, assuming there's like 50% salary retained with a San Jose or a Detroit or any other team that has a whole bunch of cap space that you can make a three-way trade with or something like that, because that's kind of the only way I can see this getting done if it ever does get done. So you can let me know in the comments if that's something you would be interested in and what you would be willing to give up for Patrick Kane, because yeah, he's a very good hockey player, he's a very valuable hockey player, and he's not going to be cheap in the slightest. Chicago, let me know in the comments as well, what would you want in return for Patrick Kane? Is it a first round pick because you don't have yours anymore this year since it was sent away in the Seth Jones trade? Is it a first and a prospect and a roster player, or is it just a first and a prospect, or is it just a younger roster player? If we're talking about top teams, what assets would you want from these top teams? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.